What's up everyone and welcome to my new video. Today I want to approach things a bit differently. I've asked you previously for feedback on how I can make my videos better, and a common remark was to get more on camera speaking myself. So that's exactly what I'm going to do today, while having some useful pop-ups and information to make the topics we're going to speak about more clear. So in this video we will be speaking about 3 movement patterns to include in your leg training. Some have the idea you can just do squats or just do deadlifts and train your entire lower body. But there are actually several movement patterns that each train your lower body in a slightly different way. And to have balanced lower body development, it makes sense to include these movement patterns into your training. So that the movement patterns we will be speaking about make more sense, I'd first like to look into the main functions of the main muscle groups we're going to be speaking about. So the muscle groups we'll be discussing in this video are the quadriceps, glutes, and hamstrings. The main function of the quadricep is to extend the knees. Your quads help straighten your knees when they are in a flexed position. When it comes to the hamstrings, there are 2 main functions. This makes the hamstrings a biarticular muscle. The hamstrings are active during hip extension and knee flexion. So when you hinge forward with your hips and bend your knees against resistance, the hamstrings will activate. When it comes to the glutes, there are also multiple functions involved. Like the hamstrings, the glutes are involved in hip extension, but they also abduct the hips and are involved in hip rotation. Now that we have a good understanding of the functions of the main muscle groups involved in leg training, let's look into the 3 main movement patterns that I suggest you include in your leg workouts. First, we have the squat pattern. When people think about leg training, they almost automatically think about barbell squats, and that is for good reason. A squat basically trains all of the major muscle groups in your lower body. But since the degree of upper body forward lean is limited in squat patterns, most of the work during squats comes from knee extension. So this will mostly be training your quadricep muscles. Your hamstrings and glutes will of course also be active during squats, just because all these lower body muscle groups work together to realize the squat movement, but the emphasis is placed on the quadriceps. And in this video there are several squat forms that I'd like to discuss, and the first one is barbell squats, which in itself also comes in many different forms. We of course have the high bar squat, low bar squat, and also front squats. Instead of complicating things on which squat pattern to use, I'd mostly go with what feels most comfortable for you. Regardless of which squat you use, if you can squat comfortably and apply progressive overload, you will experience significant lower body development. To go into these squat forms a little bit, most people will notice they are slightly stronger on the low bar squat compared to other variations. This is because more forward lean is involved, so the strong hip extensor muscles can contribute to the lift a bit more. When it comes to the front squat, you remain more upright. This can be useful for those that experience slight low back discomfort during squats, because the upright position places less stress on the low back. Regular high bar squat is what most people usually feel most comfortable with, but again I'd suggest you just go with the squat variant that feels most comfortable and effective to you. And there are also other squat variations that do not include barbells at all. Bulgarian split squats can be used as well to train the squat pattern. Since there is no direct spinal loading on the Bulgarian split squat, this is also a good variation for those who have slight low back discomfort. Research comparing split squats and barbell squats show they are mostly similar in terms of activating the lower body muscles. The split squat may slightly emphasize the hamstrings and glutes more compared to traditional barbell squats, but both exercises are great quadricep builders. The second movement pattern I suggest to include in your leg training is the hip hinge. This basically involves all deadlift variations, which are not just effective for building muscle and strength, but it's also quite a functional movement pattern, since almost everyone at one point needs to pick heavy stuff off the ground. Since hip extension is a main function of your hamstrings and glutes, this movement pattern will help focus on both of these muscles. Now when it comes to deadlifts, here there are also several variations. You are likely familiar with both the sumo and conventional deadlift. Since the knees are somewhat bent with both of these deadlift variations, these exercises involve some knee extension. So as mentioned earlier, there will be overlap between these movement patterns. Especially the sumo deadlift involves the quads quite a bit, just because you basically do a wide stance half squat at the bottom of a sumo deadlift to lift the weight up. But to really train hip extension, I'm personally a fan of using Romanian deadlifts. In this exercise, you solely focus on moving the hips throughout the entire range of motion. When you lower the weight down on the Romanian deadlift, you push your butt back while having slightly bent knees that remain stationary. Once you no longer can further push your butt back and stretch your hamstrings, you contract back up. If you want to change up your deadlift variations, I suggest you give the Romanian deadlift a try. But keep in mind that most people are much weaker on this exercise compared to other deadlift variations, just because all of the force you produce needs to come from your hips. No knee extension is involved, so the quadriceps won't be able to help you out. The third and last movement pattern is a bridge or thrust movement. Even though a bridging exercise or a thrusting motion can be considered hip extension as well, I'd like to discuss it separately just because it has some unique benefits for training your glutes. In the movement patterns we discussed earlier, your glutes are trained through hip extension. But in both of these movement patterns, there's little to no resistance placed on the glutes when you reach full hip extension. This is different with bridging and thrusting exercises. With movements like the hip thrust and glute bridges, you maximally load your glutes once they are near full hip extension. Considering this and the fact that the glute maximus is the largest muscle group in the human body, I'd say it's worth giving the glutes just a little bit of extra attention, unless for some reason you do not want to further develop your glutes. For beginner trainees, I'd suggest starting out with something like a glute bridge just because it's more simple to learn and you can load it quite easily with a dumbbell or a plate. Once you get stronger in the bridge pattern, you can move over to hip thrust and start using heavier weights. And those are the three main movement patterns I suggest you put into your leg training to train your lower body more effectively. To see how you can put this into practice, I've made available an example full body routine. This is very similar to the full body routine I gave away in my first video, so you can check that out when you visit the link in my description. There's no opt-in required. When you click the link, you'll immediately go to the full body routine. All I ask in return is that you leave your support on this video by giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel if you haven't yet. Also, I know some of you may be thinking, what about the calves? But honestly, who cares about calves? Nah, I'm just kidding. I purposely left calf training out of this video because I think it's worth discussing separately. For now, all I want to say about calf training is that it's a good idea to include both seated and standing calf raise variations for complete calf development. But that's all for this video. Let me know if you enjoyed this new type of structure in which I just directly speak to the camera, because if you did, then I can definitely do it more frequently, and I'll see you in the next video.